Hello, everyone. Pray that this broadcast finds everyone in great spirits and hope you're getting ready for a wonderful Thanksgiving. This is indeed a festive time of year for many, but I ask you all that you would just continue to pray for those during this time of year that may have lost loved ones, because again, this is a tough time of year for people that have lost loved ones because they think about them during such a festive time that they're no longer with them. I personally have lost a dear friend of mine. I was at a burial on yesterday at Fort Sam Houston with this family of this dear friend. And so I do want to encourage you all to continue to pray for those that have lost loved ones during this time as you enjoy your Thanksgiving break and holiday that's coming up soon. So welcome. Hello, Tracia. Glad you joined me today. All right, I got the hand wave. So as you all are tapping in, feel free to just shout out to me and send a message or whatever you feel free to do. But I want to talk about the topic of good Trump, bad Trump. And I bring this up for a reason. It's interesting to see what has taken place over the less than 2 years or so since the president, that is, has been in office. So it's been roughly about that time. And so we've seen quite a bit take place. Hello, Emma. Glad you have joined us, and I'm looking forward to a few more people coming in. So awesome. All right, I see you there, Tracia. Looking forward for some more people to come in. So as you all just be patient with me as a few more people join us. Thank you, Chelsea, for joining. Glad to have you. We're going to talk about good Trump, bad Trump, news you don't always hear. So this is important for us to be able to hear both sides. This topic came up. I would say that God dropped this topic into my lap. It wasn't anything I intended to talk about today. Wasn't even planning to go live today. Nevertheless, God's will is perfect and the timing is perfect. Thank you, Chelsea. Indeed, I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving already. I'm in that festive atmosphere right now in my home, so we're excited about it. And I pray that you have a happy Thanksgiving as well. So we're going to press forward. And as people join us, I hope that they indeed chime in, even those that will look at this later on. But we hear about the things that President Donald Trump is not doing well. We don't always hear about the things that he is doing well. And so I just want to bring some balance here. And I want to put a disclaimer that this is not a quote unquote defense of the president as much as it is as a defense of the office of the president of the United States. And in turn, we will talk about some positive things that our president has done. And it's nothing short of just simply great when we look at his overall record and what has taken place. Many will look and say, okay, this is a Trump speech. No, it's not a Trump speech. It's a Tim Wesley telling the other side of the story about our president that we don't always hear. And so I encourage you all to research this information. I encourage you to research more information on him. We hear about all the bad things happening, but what about the good thing that the president is doing? We have to understand, as I talked with one of my relatives this morning, if we were on a flight, no one would be complaining just at the rate that they're doing now about the pilot. If the pilot is not a great pilot, they may have a few issues here or there, but many will wait and voice their concerns once that plane has landed. They will not abuse the pilot nor the conductor of a train until that train has come to a complete stop or that flight has landed. At that point, you have a choice to go with another airline at that time. And in this case, we have 2020 coming up. And so far, we have lots of reasons to think that the Trump train is moving in the right direction with respect to how our nation is looking. And so right now, I want to point out, I was looking at CNN, happened to be on CNN this morning, and my wife walked in. And as she walked in, they were talking about the president, of course, which is what they've done for the last 2 years. Everything has been about Trump. I jokingly say that we can change CNN to TNN, Trump News Network. And I think that many people at CNN and other media outlets such as CNN should be thanking the president. And I have been challenged since the president went on the campaign trail to find out what did the news outlets talk about before President Donald Trump, or candidate Trump at the time. Because I watched the news, that's been one of my favorite things to do since I was a child. And I just don't personally recall any news outlets talking about someone so much, so often, so long, in so many ways. I saw a frowny face pop up there indeed. So the point I'm getting to is that when my wife walked in, she literally asked, is there anything they say good about the President Trump? And so we're in a situation now where I don't allow my grandkids to watch the news. If they're finding out anything that's going on, we try to inform them, keep them informed on our own. But nevertheless, I looked at an article recently CNN wrote, and they said the economy is soaring. Donald Trump, ? Not so much. So even when we see things that are taking place that are great with respect to the President of the United States, we find that some media outlets, they would twist that to make it a bad thing. And in that one particular article, they mentioned briefly about the economy soaring and things of that nature. And then they went in I would say about 95% of the rest of the article is about negative things about the president, about his administration, about the Republican Party. But I want to talk about some positives. Good Trump, bad Trump. What about the good Trump? Since our president has been in office, the economy has grown. The growth that we see now is projected to exceed 3% over the next calendar year. Now, as I talk about these things, I want you all to just imagine a CNN, for example, talking about these things with the same amount of force, boldness, and consistency as they talk about the negative things. Our jobs, when we look at America now under President Trump, we have more Americans that are employed now than ever before in our history. Unemployment claims are at a 50-year low. Think about this for a moment. If it's talked about in the mainstream media, it's going to be a footnote at best. African American, Hispanic, and Asian American unemployment rates have all recently reached record lows. You may have heard this as a footnote, but have you heard that women unemployment recently is at its lowest rate in 65 years? Think about this. Now, the womanizer Trump, as they have labeled him, and some things I will admittedly say, President Trump has put himself in a situation whereby people have targeted him for things that he said, things that he's done. But at the end of the day, we see results taking place with his presidency. Women unemployment at its lowest rate in 65 years. Think about that for a moment. Youth unemployment, even for our young people, it's at its lowest level in 50 years. Now, if I just stop right there just for a moment and we just look and said, okay, these are some of the things that has taken place under Trump. Well, we don't always hear about these things in the mainstream media. We don't hear about veteran unemployment being at its lowest level in over 2 decades, nearly 2 decades here. Think about that. So right now, I've already told you that African American, Hispanic, and Asians have low unemployment rates, historic low unemployment rates. I've told you that women have the lowest unemployment rates in about 65 years. Youth unemployment rate is at its lowest in about 50 years, and veterans unemployment rate is at its lowest in almost 2 decades. Now imagine how much positivity Americans can get from such reports. Imagine how positive this will look for President Trump and his administration. Well, that's not the idea. It seems that mainstream media does not want these things, does not want this positivity. In addition, when we look at those with high school diplomas, they are at a recent low, a record low when it comes to unemployment. Think about this. We have many Americans, that's all they've achieved, it's a high school diploma. Yet we see that under the Trump administration, we see unemployment rates at a record low for such individuals. We see that even the disabled, think about this for a moment, the rate for disabled Americans reached and hit a record low as well. So you're telling me that in a nation whereby the mainstream media has access to many American homes, and they can talk about positive things about our United States of American president. Think about this, United States of America. Our president can be taunted for and talked about for great things, but yet and still he's not. When we talk about things such as unemployment again, and when it talks about jobs, nearly 2/3 of Americans rate the society now as good, a good time to find a good quality job. So that talks about optimism. If you turn on the news now, you probably won't have much optimism. You probably have a lot of pessimism. And because of that, I want to give you the flip side. Americans, when it comes down to that optimism, small business optimism hits a historic high. Think about that now. Small businesses, where it's come. That's where it's at. You see job growth and everything else, it's going to be hinged on small businesses. But the media is not telling you that the optimism among small business owners is at historic highs. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, they look at this and simply said that it has broken a 35-year-old record as far as the optimism. 35-year-old record. Under the Trump administration, now the optimism is high amongst business owners. And the consumer confidence is at an 18-year high. I don't know about you, but this is a lot of good news in such a short period of time. I've only been talking about 10 minutes, and you'll probably hear things on the news all day long about the negative things under the Trump administration. Someone may ask, well, what about the American income? The American income has risen when it comes down to Hispanic Americans. And I mention Hispanic Americans because this is what the facts say. Many will assume that a President Trump administration and Republicans hate Hispanics. They don't like Hispanics. We hear about racism and all these other things taking place. How about the median income for the Hispanic Americans rose by 3.7% and surpassed $50,000 for the first time ever in history. In addition, home ownership among Hispanics is at its highest rate in nearly a decade under the Trump administration, with Republicans, for the most part, holding both the House and the Senate up until recently. Consider this as well when it comes down to African Americans and Hispanics. The poverty rates have reached the lowest levels ever recorded. Oh, wow. Did you all hear me? I'm talking about people that many will say that President Trump and his administration does not like. We see that when it comes to African Americans and Hispanic Americans, the poverty rates are at an all-time record low. What about American business? Again, good Trump, bad Trump. You turn on CNN and many other liberal news networks, and you're going to have the bad Trump. But what about the good Trump? So far, I've told you about a lot of good news in just 12 minutes and 12 seconds. But hold on. I've got to give you more good news that you probably will not hear on mainstream media. When it comes down to American businesses, the ISM's index, that's Institute for Supply Management, their index of manufacturing scored its highest reading in 14 years. Think about that, 14 years. And when it comes down to worker productivity, it's at its highest in more than 3 years. I don't know about you, but if I'm running a business, I want my workers to be productive workers. Productivity equals higher rates of finances coming in for that company. They make more money. And so the businesses do better. And when they do better, the people will tend to do better. Steel and aluminum producers are reopening. President talked about it. He promised a lot of things on the campaign trail. And what's upsetting a lot of people, it seems the president is keeping his promises, unlike many people that have promised things in the past. When we look at deregulation, regulations, they have hindered small businesses forever. They've hindered people forever. And so when it comes down to this president, this administration, deregulation is taking place. He's completed 22 deregulation actions for every regulation that he signed into office during his first year. For every regulation that came through under him, 22 deregulations versus 1 when it came down to new regulations. Also, when we look at the rollback of some burdensome things, I had a great opportunity to talk to some farmers and ranchers while on the campaign trail recently. And one of the things they talked about is the WOTUS, the Waters of the U.S. rule. This was hurting farmers and ranchers. This was something that literally caused them to have to figure out through the federal government what they can and cannot do to farm, what was allowable and what was not to even do their jobs. Well, under this president, he rolled back some of those burdensome regulations that undoubtedly will help the farmers and ranchers. When it comes to tax cuts, we've heard a lot about the tax cuts. And the president, of course, he's talked about the tax cuts, and we've heard about it on CNN and some of the more conservative networks as well. But what we don't hear about is the fact that 9 out of 10 American workers expect to see higher increases in their paychecks. I don't know about you, but higher increases in a paycheck sounds good to me. And 9 out of 10 workers expect to see them. But we don't hear about this. How about the good news of about more than 6 million American workers have already received wage increases, bonuses, and increased benefits due to the tax cuts? And I want to point this out. You probably won't hear this on your networks, but over 100 utility companies have lowered electric, gas, or water rates thanks to the tax cuts. Yeah, many people won't like the tax cuts, and many people complain about the tax cuts. They'll say the Republicans were simply helping the rich. Could they have done better with the tax cuts? Could some things have been done better? Indeed, there could have been some better things done with the tax cuts. Could have tweaked some things here or there. Nevertheless, we see taxes getting ready to be raised again under this new Democratic Congress. They're already talking about raising taxes, but more for a socialist type agenda. Look it up for yourselves. Do your own research. Welcome, Dave. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And when we think about the president, good Trump, bad Trump, we hear about the bad Trump all the time. Again, on Trump News Network. But what about the good Trump? What about what's taking place with worker development? Under this president, he's established a National Council for American Workers to develop a national strategy for training and retraining American workers for high demand industries. Think about that for a moment. Americans being put to work, Americans being trained and retrained for high demand industries, and a council being established for that. I don't know about you, but that's a good thing. That's a great thing. That's an American thing. That's the American way. When we think about what's taking place with career and technical education, not everyone's got to go out and get a 4-year degree. Not everyone's got to go out and get a master's degree. Not everyone will go out and get a PhD, a doctorate of business, or whatever the case may be. Traditional education is simply not going to be for everyone, even though I encourage it. Some people will do extremely well when it comes down to technical training. And so the president signed the first Perkins Career and Technical Education, that's CTE, reauthorization since 2006, authorizing more than $1 billion for states each year to fund vocational and career education programs. But we don't always hear about this. Think about how many people you know have benefited from vocational or career educational programs. Think about how many people you have known to benefit from trades. Where would we be without AC and heating representatives and techs? Where would we be without plumbers? Where would we be without people that have gone down the technical route that have done quite well for themselves and been able to take care of their families with no problems? And the president is looking at this as an option that we should increase funding for. When we think about the executive order that he signed, expanding apprenticeships opportunities for students and workers, you don't hear about this. Good Trump, bad Trump. They're going to talk about all the bad things, but what about the positive things? Imagine what would society be like if Americans heard about the more positive things about America and about our president. And think about the people around the globe. What about the people around the globe? How do you think they view America if we're attacking our president all the time? And I say all the time because I challenge you to think about one day, just one day, even a weekend, whereby the president was not verbally and viciously attacked. Many will look and they bring balance and say, well, it happened to President Obama. I challenge you. I guarantee you, if you look, you will not see President Obama being attacked every single day. Nor will you see the same thing with President Bush, nor will you see the same thing with President Clinton. Just go back. You won't see it. No president has been attacked so viciously every single day. Now, am I again defending President Trump? Well, President Trump, he's been defending himself quite well. Many talked about his Twitter account and said, take it away. I said, leave the man's Twitter account alone. Without that Twitter account, where will he be? He's been able to defend himself quite well with using such an instrument. And so for me, I think it's been helpful for him at certain times to use it. Thank you, Donna, for joining in. Yes, mainstream media, they do. They definitely have a bad agenda. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. And when we look at certain things such as domestic infrastructure, again, I'm talking good Trump, bad Trump. What about the good things about what he's doing? Domestic infrastructure. He's already proposed an infrastructure plan that will utilize $200 billion in federal funds to spur at least $1.5 trillion in infrastructure investment across the country. And we know that infrastructure, if you were to Google it today, it's at the front lines right now. We need infrastructure work done. He's also committed to an executive order expediting environmental reviews and approvals for high priority infrastructure projects, things that have been caught up in the whirlwind, caught up in the webs. Healthcare, when it comes to healthcare, mainstream media, they're not talking about healthcare under President Trump unless it's negative. What about the positives? He signed the most comprehensive childhood cancer legislation ever into law. Think about that. As a cancer survivor, both my wife and I, we know how important it is to have funding for research. We know how important it is to have bills for research. And when it comes to our children, we love our children. And he signed the most comprehensive childhood cancer legislation ever into law, which will advance childhood cancer research and improve treatments. Also, when it comes to right to try legislation, he signed that, expanding healthcare options for terminally ill patients, giving them the right to try something that may keep them alive. But we don't hear about these things. Good Trump, bad Trump. Why not talk about some of the good things that our president, and I say our president, we heard about people talking, oh, I'm going to leave if he wins the presidency. I'm leaving. I'm moving to Canada. I'm moving. But they're still here. Why? Because America is still great. And America is prospering under President Donald J. Trump. We have to understand when we look at healthcare as well. He enacted changes to Medicare 340B program, saving seniors an estimated $320 million on drugs in 2018 alone. Further, he proposed Title 10, a Title 10 rule, which will help ensure taxpayers do not fund any abortion industry in violation of the law. Think about that for a moment. No one wants to be paying taxes and funding abortion when you don't believe in it. The president's making sure that we have protections against that. He reinstated and expanded the Mexico City policy to keep foreign aid from supporting the global abortion industry. Those that are pro-life like me, this is extremely important for you. In addition, the president, through the HHS, formed a new division that's going to make sure that we have our rights protected when it comes down to religious freedoms. And finally, he signed an executive order to help ensure that religious organizations are not forced to choose between violating their religious beliefs and complying with Obamacare's contraceptive mandate or shutting their doors. These are things that are extremely important, but we don't hear about them. These are things that have been positive in his administration, but we don't hear about them. And if we do, it's a footnote. It's a footnote in an article. It's a footnote on a televised rendition of the news. Nevertheless, we move further. And I'll beg to keep you long, but I have to share the positives because you'll watch 30 minutes at a time of negative TNN, Trump News Network. But what about some positives? Because I believe that showing the positive of our president helps the United States. I believe that showing positives about what the president does as far as his directing of the U.S. and overseeing of policies, I believe this helps us, not hurt us. When we think about foreign policy, he did something that multiple presidents promised, but they failed to do. It was a talking point by multiple presidents that they were going to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Many talked about it. Many promised it on the campaign trail, but only one man did it, and that's President Donald J. Trump, and he did it expeditiously. Do you all realize how powerful that is? For people of faith, for Christians, for believers. Do you realize that he did something that multiple presidents promised, but he followed through and he did it in less than 2 years? Today, we now have the U.S. Embassy, and it's now in Jerusalem, capital of Israel. He also withdrew from the Iran deal, which was a bad deal for Americans, reopposing sanctions that had been lifted or waived. Yes, yes, yes. And I have to tell you, he did something he didn't think he can do. He was able to not only sit down with in a historic summit, but talk and begin the process of good negotiations with the North Korean president, Kim Jong-un, bringing the beginning of peace and denuclearization to the Korean Peninsula. And otherwise, we needed to denuclearize that Korean Peninsula. I've been to Korea before. I was over in South Korea. And for him to speak about peace and doing what he's done with this president of North Korea, this is historic. Historic. And now we also see something else that most may not have heard about. But quietly, under President Trump, more than a dozen American hostages have been freed from captivity all over the world. But we don't hear about this. And not to include the fact that we have remains from our American service members being returned back from North Korea. We don't always hear about this. When it comes down to border security, I need not even go any further. We know how the president has fought to secure our borders. We know he's constantly fighting to secure us from gangs such as MS-13, protecting American communities. We know that under his administration, a 14-mile section of wall has been constructed near San Diego. And for those that may not realize it, that's one of the entrances that the caravan is trying to come through. We know that under his administration, when it comes to border security and immigration, he has enhanced the vetting process of individuals trying to enter the United States to ensure that those that are posing harm and threats to our country are identified before they enter. And he's also created a thing called VOICE. Many may not even know. Maybe you've heard of VOICE. If you hadn't, VOICE was created, and it's called the Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement, VOICE office. And he created this office under his administration in order to support the victims and families affected by illegal alien crime. President's done quite a bit there. Quite a bit. I'll point out to you all as well. Indeed, trace your prophecy. Indeed, when it comes down to Jerusalem and the capital of Israel and the embassy, so lots of prophetic things taking place there. When we think about veteran affairs as a veteran, and I'm only at 27 minutes, I will wrap up here in just a moment. You all give CNN 30 minutes of your time. I thank you for giving me about 30 minutes of your time. So instead of the Trump News Network giving you bad news, I just want to give you some good news about what the president of the United States is doing. We'll tell you as well, when it comes to energy, we withdrew from the job-killing Paris Climate Agreement, which would have cost us nearly $3 trillion and led to 6.5 million fewer industrial sector jobs by 2040. And so, in addition, the president, through his leadership, he got the EU to increase its imports of liquefied natural gas from the United States, which is a positive thing. Yes, thank you, Tracia, thank you. Indeed, I'll point out to you all as well that when it comes to our veteran affairs, being a veteran, I definitely am always interested in veteran issues and finding out and seeing what the president is doing. Just a couple of things I want to point out. And keep in mind, I'm sharing things with you, and these are not an exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive list of things I'm sharing with you. But when it comes to veteran affairs, he signed legislation that provided $86.5 billion in funding for the Department of Veteran Affairs. In addition, he signed the VA Choice and Quality Employment Act in 2017, which authorized $2.1 billion in additional funds for Veterans Choice Program, which will give veterans an option as for what programs they'll be able to participate in. And when it comes to defense, we definitely know that having a strong defense is always in America's interest, better interest. And so he's made sure that we have $700 billion in military funding for fiscal year 2018 and $716 billion for fiscal year 2019. Having a strong military has always been in our best interest. And when it comes to our military, they've had the largest military pay raise in nearly a decade. And even when it comes to our military spouses, he signed an executive order so that the military spouses will have help finding employment as their family members deploy domestically and abroad. And finally, I'll close out with law and order. Under his presidency, the president has confirmed more than 24 U.S. circuit court judges. He's made sure that he signed an executive order that focused on providing more federal resources on dismantling transnational criminal organizations such as drug cartels, He's also created an interagency task force that works around the clock to prosecute traffickers, protect victims, and prevent human trafficking. And he also conducted what we call an Operation Cross Country 11, which is to combat human trafficking. And you don't hear about this on the media all the time. But in this effort, we were able to rescue 84 children and arrest 120 human traffickers. This is not always talked about, but human trafficking is a serious issue. And under this administration, it's been addressed and it's been attacked. And finally, I'll point out that he's endorsed here recently a new bipartisan supported prison reform bill that will loosen some mandatory minimum sentences. We know that that has hurt minority communities drastically. And we know that by signing this prison reform bill, it will begin to help those in the future and hopefully turn around some things that have damaged so many minority communities. So in closing, instead of us criticizing the president, because regardless of what president it's been, I'll say, like I've said before, I've not always agreed with 100% of anything any president has done. But what I have done 100% of the time, since I've been in the know and since I've known better, I've prayed for our presidents, regardless of whether they've been Republican or Democrat. Even though I didn't agree with them, if I had some disagreement, I made sure I reached out to someone that can get a word to that president or get a word before the American people to make the change that I thought would be something that would benefit Americans. So instead of criticizing him, I challenge you all to pray for him. And for those that have criticized the president, the White House, and this administration, and you say that you're Christians, you say that you're believers, I ask the question, when was the last time you prayed for the president? When was the last time you prayed for this administration? When was the last time you spoke positive vibes into the atmosphere for this president? When was the last time you looked at alternative news? When was the last time you looked at things on the positive when you've seen and heard so much on the negative? When was the last time you said, I'm going to research what people are giving me? You can't eat everything someone feeds you. And everything they feed you, just because they say it's good, doesn't mean it's good. We have to be in the know. We have to begin to research and understand what we're getting. It's not always coming without a hidden agenda. I challenge you, and I ask you, and I encourage you, if I share anything with you on this particular broadcast, research it for yourselves. Find out if I'm telling you the truth or not. And if I'm telling you something that's inaccurate, then I challenge you to bring it back to me so that we can discuss it. And if I'm wrong, I'll say that I'm wrong. If I give you bad information, I'll say that it was bad and inaccurate, and I'll correct it. But it's never going to be intentional that I do such a thing. I point out to you all in closing that if you get bad news, look for the good news. We're not going to be talking about anything other than what I see that is factual on this particular broadcast. Look at your own imperfections. In closing, do you have any imperfections? Do you have anything wrong with you? Do you have any flaws? If you have flaws and imperfections, think about that before we criticize the president of the United States, before we criticize this administration. And by all means, use our legislative system. If you have things you don't agree with, reach out to your congressmen, reach out to your senators, reach out to the people that can get your voice heard in the halls of Congress and get your voice heard before the president. But we want to make sure we keep America looking great and being great and making sure that we continue to look great as we are great as American citizens. I pray that this good Trump, bad Trump has been good for you. And I pray that you've heard some things that maybe you did not know. And if you heard these things before, feel free to share them, because there are many people that haven't heard the good news about what has taken place under the President Trump administration. My name is Dr. Tim Wesley. I want to continue to inform, inspire, and ignite you to be a part of the political process and also to be in the know. May God bless you. And may he be with you is my prayer. Thank you for giving me 34 minutes and 27 seconds of your time. God bless.